Hi, I'm Rachelle Mee-Chapman, and this is Relig-ish, your source for right fit spirituality. Today on Religious, we're wondering what makes a solid, right fit spiritual practice. And there's three characteristics that go into a spiritual practice that's relevant to you, that reflects your core values, and that makes sense when you're doing it. And those three elements are that right fit spiritual practices are rooted in your history, authentic to who you are today, and creative enough to grow with you. Let's start with this idea of rootedness. It's really important that we not ignore our roots and that we pay homage and respect to them. This is especially true for people who grew up in a particular religious tradition. If you grew up immersed in an institutionalized faith, the beliefs and the traditions of that faith are a huge part of your cultural identity. You know, a friend of mine, Barbara, who used to be a nun and then later became a Protestant woman, I asked her, do you miss Catholicism? And she said to me, once you're a Catholic, always a Catholic. And that started me on this road to understanding that our religious heritage is very much an identifier of who we are. It helps us to find our place in the broader source of the world. So if you're sort of edging out to the edge of institutionalized faith, or if you have one foot in the door and one foot out of the door, or if you're all the way over into the spiritual but not religious camp and you are creating a right fit spirituality for yourself outside of a institutionalized gathering, you can't just ignore the roots that you came from. It's like families that immigrate to the U.S. The children that are born in their home country and then immigrate to the U.S. are sometimes called a 1.5 generation. And children that are born into the home country, the first generation, is called first generation Americans. And if you're moving out of an institutionalized faith experience, you're like a 1.5 or first generational spiritual but not religious person. And recognizing and paying attention to your roots and honoring them in adaptive ways in your new culture will help you remain grounded to the whole arc of your personal narrative. The second aspect of a good right fit spiritual practice is that it be authentic. You know, a few years back when I was going through a big spiritual shift of my own, I sometimes read this blog, and I can't remember the name of the blog anymore, but the tagline was a theology that can look people in the eye. And at the time, all of my theology made me a little squeamish. I had a hard time explaining it to people when they asked. I couldn't explain it with conviction, and there was a lot of it that I just would rather sweep under the carpet because I didn't truly believe in it. You need to be able to sing the songs, say the creed, enact the rituals without cringing, without lying, and without denying your own convictions. So whatever your spiritual practice is, it has to be authentic to who you are now. Yes, we want to honor the roots and the essential traditions of where you came from, but you have to do it in a way that is honest and authentic about your current set of beliefs. Your practices need to be authentic to your current beliefs, to your current way of living, to your current orientation, to your present, to your now. The challenge of being authentic to your history and being connected to your roots while still being authentic to the person you are today and the beliefs that you hold today leads us to our third aspect of a solid, right fit spiritual practice, which is that it has to be creative enough to grow with you. Creation is an ongoing process. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's the first thing we know about God or the divine. God created. In the beginning, God created. And he said it was good. So of course, there's a big part of our humanness and of the divine DNA thumbprint within us that wants us to be creative. And this includes being creative in our spiritual practices. Religious institutions in their current incarnation are the products of modernism, the binary way of thinking. It's about binary propositions, true and false, black and white, right or wrong. As we've moved into a postmodern way of thinking, those definitive lines of binary thinking have become blurred, and we've become more inclined to accept the idea of both and, a more inclusive way of thinking. The problem is that because the religious institutions are largely still in that modernist way of thinking, that binary way of thinking, the idea is that whatever spiritual practices have been established in those institutions fall into the category of right, and anything new or different or adapted falls into the category of wrong. Now, this isn't true with every institutionalized form of faith, but with many. And within the church, there are certain sacred rites which are, generally speaking, not really allowed to be tampered with, including prayer, preaching, communion, and that Sunday morning gathering. These are things that we typically see as core spiritual practices of the church, and to get too creative with them is frowned upon. The problem is that this binary system of right and wrong, established and dangerous, doesn't take into account the normal human practices of questioning, growth, having evolving ideas. It doesn't take into account the ongoing nature of narrative, and it doesn't make space necessarily for your personal ongoing narrative of growth and development. The binary approach doesn't honor the process, and we are all, for better or worse, in the midst of process. We don't mature in faith and then come to a stopping point. So the practices that help us mature in faith also shouldn't be set in stone, not even our marble altars. We need to make space for this core value of creativity that's so evident in the beginning words of our faith, and let that creativity continue to shape our most treasured practices as our understanding of ourselves and God and the place of ourselves and God in this world with other humans continues to mature. Remember last week when we talked about the dangers of orthodoxy, that if we weight our faith too heavily in the orthodoxy camp, right thinking or right believing, what we do is we establish a set of beliefs that aren't necessarily actionable in our everyday life. So what we're doing here when we try to create right fit spiritual practices that are rooted in our history, authentic to who we are today, and creative enough to grow with us, is we're trying to step a little further into the idea of orthopraxis, right living, an actionable way of living your faith in the world. So here's a little teaser for next week. I'd like us to start exploring some of those marble altars within the faith, within the Christian faith in particular, and see if we can't create a way of doing them that's rooted, authentic, and creative for our now. What if prayer was redefined as conversation? What if blogging counted as preaching? What if meals were honored as communion? And what if Sunday morning church was reborn as a kind of deconstructed tribe? So until we meet again, be curious, trust your gut, and live from a place of love. Lots of warmth.